Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to Proper Madness. My name is Sabby, and I give a unique perspective on mental health by providing tools, guidance, and knowledge on how we can better understand ourselves, as well as our past and present experiences, and in doing so, we can help heal our mental health. I get to speak with a variety of individuals from around the world as they share their stories from their journey through their mental wellness so that it helps others stand strong and use their voice. Welcome back, everyone, to Proper Madness. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to Matthias. He is a licensed mental health counselor, and I am very happy to have him on, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Get to talk to you. This is going to be great.
It's always nice to have guests on here that specialize in something that I'm passionate about, so it's really cool to have you. But yeah, can you tell me a little bit about your story and how you got into, becoming a counselor and all that?
Yeah. So I'm a psychotherapist. I work with a lot of trauma, a lot of couples work. I specialize kind of with working with couples where one or both people have trauma in their background. And so those are kind of the two domains I spend the most time in clinically. But then I also make videos on the internet and talk about mental health and talk about, I don't know, all sorts of just different relational trauma. That's kind of maybe the general topic that I spend the most time thinking about and talking about is the relationships that matter most to us, whether that's like, I don't know, your relationship with your mom or your dad or with your kids or with your spouse or with your boss, with someone a neighbor that you're in an argument with, whatever. There's these key relationships in our life that really do make up like the substance of our lives that when they fall into disrepair, when we fall into like these huge conflicts, it's not just that conflict is hyper stressful and frustrating. It can sometimes activate the constellation of events that have happened in our past where we felt abandoned or rejected or we felt, left hanging out to dry. And so I have to find that kind of that relational trauma is kind of a good title for it, because it's not just the relationships that you have in the present, it's how the relationships in the present resonate with all the experiences you've had in the past. And so when we can get clarity in those places, when we can heal some of the wounds of the past, that enables us to draw deeper into relationships and connection with people in the present. We can learn a lot about ourselves within these relationships as well. So I don't know, that's kind of like the general domain I think the most in. That's what I'm up to. That's what I do.
Yeah, that's what I really love and cherish, because I know for me, personally, I think a lot of people can relate to this. Most of my healing is done through having a relationship with someone else. I've noticed. And it's always in those very difficult moments where it's getting all messy, either through conversation and emotions, and through that you learn so much just about yourself too. So
yeah, well said. Yeah, I think that's so common. It's like you're getting married and you're getting to know like your in-laws or something, and then like your father-in-law, your mother-in-law drives you crazy, and you're like, why do they drive me crazy? Like, what is it? And then I don't know, it leads to some reflection about just how you grew up and some of your own values and what makes you different, and how you relate to family, how you relate to, that marriage bond, and who takes priority in what different situations. And all of that stuff is deeply personal. It's all tied to how you see yourself, how you see the world around you. So that's where trauma work really can come into this space, especially when there's like key violations within those key relationships, where there's abuse, where there's neglect. And then also just some practical skills are often helpful in there, such as talking about boundaries, conflict resolution, relevant.
can I ask your story around what inspired you to get into your line of work?
Yeah, I actually got in almost kind of on accident. I was originally kind of applying to start a social work degree. This was back mid-20s. I was just thinking about wanting to, I don't know, really help. I'll back up just a little bit. I was a youth pastor in a low-income neighborhood for a few years, and I was working with kids who had experienced a lot of trauma. And so I had this little like youth group at my church where we'd put on games and make activities for like 30 kids in the neighborhood. And these kids had backgrounds of like PTSD and abuse and neglect and trauma, and had parents that struggled with substance abuse. And I remember in that mode just feeling really under-equipped, and like I really didn't know how to help, even though I really wanted to help. And I could help maybe in a spiritual way, and I could help just in showing up and being there and in a way that was relationally close, like, as a mentor, as like a spiritual leader, but I wanted to be able to kind of, I don't know, do more. I just felt under-equipped. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get a social work degree. I'll figure out how to kind of work within the systems, work within just kind of the different government agencies that we have set up to really make some real change in people's lives and be a part of, kind of the practical everyday struggles that people are having. And was excited about that. And then the program that I was applying to, they didn't like my math credit for my undergrad degree. And they're saying you have to take a statistics course in order to apply. And so I'd have to wait another semester. And I was like, man, all right, well, this is irritating. And, but they said, but the counseling program, doesn't care about that math credit. And so you could do the counseling program now, or you could wait a semester, do a math class, and then do the social work. So I was like, I don't want to do a math class. I'll do counseling. So, I mean, it's a pretty uninspiring reason to get into the field, but yeah. So I don't know. I joined the counseling program and then immediately fell in love with it. I was like, wow, what a powerful field it is to be able to sit with somebody and work through their past and their past experiences and work through the intricacies of their relationships. And I think that it's all a partnership. So really, when we're talking about people who are like in low income settings or people that struggle with severe mental illness or disability or what have you, I mean, the social worker is needed. In some cases, there's intensive services that are needed. The mental health component is needed. So, I kind of started my career working with that population that I went into intending to work with, and, a lot of kids, a lot of young boys that experienced abuse as a kid. And so I worked with a bunch of social workers, and I worked in the court system, and I worked with, something called maladaptive sexual behavior, which is when kids sexually abuse other kids. And it was a really intense population. It was a lot of trauma, and it was, the kind of population that a lot of therapists avoid and don't really try to get into because it's kind of heartbreaking and heavy and difficult. And it's more often the case that people don't get better and things continue to kind of spiral into hard places than people make a big turnaround. But, those of us who stuck in it and continued to do the work really found it meaningful because, those kids really matter. And if those kids could have someone that really believed in them and took an interest in making sure that they were advocated for, and I don't know how those experiences, those horrific experiences that they were enduring, could find healing that made it worth it. And so anyway, I was working at an agency that specialized in working with problematic sexual behavior. I was kind of a part of those systems, but from the mental health side instead of the social work side, and really enjoyed that. Found that actually that role fit me a lot better and fit my personality a lot better. And then, kind of a long series of events kind of started to unfold where I found myself working with domestic violence and couples, and found that just in my interest that really fit in a way that I guess I didn't really expect. Like I said, I kind of went in wanting to really work with kids and focus on kids, and still did a lot of that work, but kind of slowly started merging over to doing work with couples, and then found just a lot of meaning and really enjoyed that work, working with people that, start with these really kind of chaotic relationships where everyone from the outside is like, why are you together? Why are you still like in this? Like, there's so much dysfunction, there's so much toxicity. But then what we'd find is that when we peel back the layers, we found that there was trauma underneath. And then when we could resolve and work through that trauma, heal that trauma, then this relationship, this marriage that was, from the outside looking in, completely devastated and doomed, could repair and actually become something really beautiful. And that was really exciting. And so I guess as my career has unfolded, I've kind of widened the populations that I've worked with, and not just working with kids, not just working with couples, working with individuals, working with people young and old, and I don't know, kind of people from all different walks of life. And then my online work was me just kind of making videos about the things that I was learning. It wasn't so much like I was making TikToks or Instagram videos about all these things that I knew that I teach all my clients. It was kind of almost the opposite. It was like me going into a therapeutic relationship with people that were, involved in tremendous suffering, and then us learning together, deeper layers of the human experience and what it means to move towards what's meaningful in your life and to heal from traumatic events. And then I would bring those insights that we both kind of uncovered together into a video and kind of summarize the main kind of theme and talk about it, and And then those videos really seem to take off in a pretty big way. And so it's recently kind of shifted into me doing a lot of online work and me traveling around and talking about trauma and yeah, a lot of stuff with the general public, doing like workshops, trying to kind of make some of these ideas more accessible for larger groups of people that maybe don't have access to, have counseling or, I don't know, live in like a rural area where there's not a lot of access to different counselors, and to get in and do this work privately, just making sure that stuff is online so that people can see it and experience that healing.
Well,
So
I think that's wonderful, because there are so many people who need some form of help in some way, not even advice, but they need to know that they're not alone in what they're feeling and thinking, what they're going through. And I remember stumbling across your videos, and it happened to be that I was facing a similar issue the same time I came across it. And I went, wow, this is just like, it sat with me for a while. I'm a very cerebral person, so it sat with me, and I dived into it. It even helped me on my platform. I went, you know what? Because you can tell when content is authentic and when someone isn't just making content because they feel like they have to, or to achieve something. It's because it genuinely comes from a place where you're like, you know what? No, people need the help. They need the advice, especially in those lower income rural areas where there isn't a lot of mental health access, unfortunately. And but everyone has a phone for the most part. Everyone has
Right.
the internet, so you help how you can, and I think that's what matters. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning I was a little skeptical that it could be all that helpful. I think like in mental health generally, especially when I started, there just wasn't a lot of therapists that had social media accounts, much less trying to make, big podcasts and videos and workshops and all that. I mean, you have like the authors, you have some
Yeah.
of the big like trainers. Like there was a very big system for training therapists on mental health content, but not a lot of people trying to make those same kinds of workshops for the general public. And because there's just kind of a fear that we didn't want to water it down. We didn't, it's hard. Like it's hard talking about trauma in a public way because you just don't want to trigger somebody and then someone be spiraling into a place of, a lot of vulnerability. And then there's no one there to help, you know, hold that with them to de-escalate it. I think there's this underlying fear that like, what if someone's suicidal? What if someone has self-harm tendencies? And then a video that someone makes, provokes that.
Mm.
And so that I spent, man, that bugged me for like a good year and a half. And I just talked to every, expert that I could think of like, how do I do this in a way that's going to protect the most vulnerable, that's going to be ethical, that's going to be something that adds to the flourishing and doesn't drag people into the hardest experiences of their life and then leave them there. Like, how do I make this something that heals, not something that kind of picks at a scab of a wound and starts the bleeding again. So I mean, there's a lot of trial and error and feedback, I guess is the right word, feedback that I got from experts and people with me doing it, where that was front of our minds. But that's, I think, what I interpret to be some of the hesitation for a lot of mental health professionals to do something like what I'm doing is not wanting to mess up. But I think in the result of that is that mental health information, especially around healing from trauma, is really vague, hard to understand, really abstract, because there haven't been people that come in and make it tangible and make it understandable kind of for the everyday person that doesn't have a master's degree. And
Yeah.
and that's a process of, I don't know, technically it's popularizing stuff that's really high academia, and the academic types are, of course, hesitant to have their stuff popularized because in doing so, there's a fear that it's watered down. But if done correctly, it just actually makes it more accessible. If done to fidelity, as they would say, it actually brings people into a deeper layer of their work. So I don't know. There's a lot there, but I have tons of thoughts on that because I've thought a lot about it. But that's the general lay of the land as I see it.
No, I appreciate that, because that's kind of what got me started on my whole journey. Is I was diagnosed with PTSD, and then I went, how do I find a way to help other people help themselves? And I thought, okay, I'll just share my story and what I'm learning, because I don't have it figured out. I don't think anyone ever really has it figured out, including professionals, because we're still learning, we're still growing. So yeah, I started to just share my story, and I got a lot of comments about like, wow, this isn't triggering for me. I thought it would be just by you talking about it, but it's not. And I'm like, well, Because I'm talking about it in a way that's not what's the word I'm looking for? That's not
Mm,
transactional,
yeah.
it's just talking about it in a way that I know, okay, if someone feels less alone, I think that's what matters. And then
Mhm.
directing them towards where they can get help if needed.
Yeah. That's
But
so
yeah.
well put. I would only add too that I think when we name the chaos, it actually calms down.
Mm,
Like when we name the distress, when we can put words to it, it's experienced as relief, not as it escalating.
yes, that is so true. That
You
is
know?
very, very true. Because I think chaos is just so intangible
Mm-hmm.
always. And I think as human beings, we have a hard time slowing down and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing what we're seeing, what we're feeling, and then how to take a step back and look at it from a lens of understanding as opposed to just being
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. I love how you put that. Yeah. I
yeah.
totally agree. Totally agree.
But you triggered a question in me. Speaking of triggers.
Sorry, I triggered you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, okay, so how do you feel about trigger warnings generally? I have my own opinion about
Uh, I think
about trigger warnings.
I have a thought. I don't think they should be I don't think trigger warning is the right word, but I get
Mm,
that there's actually there's something there that does need to be considered. And that's that I want people to be able to give consent into entering into a conversation before they're kind of thrust into it.
mm,
So for example, if I make a video on sexual abuse, um, I want to let people know right from the beginning, hey, I might be setting up this video and talking about different things. Here's where I'm going to land. I'm going to land about talking about sexual abuse. If you have the capacity for that right now, if that's something you want to talk about, let's do it. If you're like at a family reunion and you're just like, I don't know, like you're at Thanksgiving or something, you just scroll through your phone. That might not be the time and place you want to watch a video about sexual abuse. And so like, I just want people to not feel surprised and like, oh, I wasn't really ready for that. That wasn't really the space I was in.
mm,
Um, and I think that's more of a gesture of respect and courtesy rather than it being me trying to prevent like a genuine panic attack or something like that. I don't think people get triggered by bringing up a topic on suicide or sexual abuse or um, that's not actually mapping onto the neurology of a trigger. The neurology of a trigger is actually something that's in the implicit memory. So for example, it's when you go through a traumatic event, you take an imprint of the sensory experiences that you're experiencing around the time of the trigger. And then if there is a sensory experience that reminds you of the vulnerability and of the fear that you experienced while you were experiencing that traumatic event, that's what's triggering. And so it's more often the case, it's like smells
mm,
or the way the wind blows across your face, like that cold, icy wind that hit you when your mom left you outside, in the freezing cold and didn't let you in because she was punishing you. And then you're on a cold winter day, you're walking and you feel that same gust of cold wind. It brings you back to that moment when your mom left you outside. That's the trigger, right?
mm.
It's not like someone saying, you know how sometimes parents leave their kids outside? It's like
Yeah.
that's not the traumatic thing. The traumatic thing is I'm back in the moment and the moment has captured me and brought me back into a place of vulnerability. So, I mean, and that's why I say sometimes the context that you watch a video like around sexual abuse can be vulnerable. If you're at a family reunion and there's someone at the family reunion that was violent towards you or was violated you in some way, and then a big sexual abuse video comes up, that might be triggering because you're
Yeah.
around this sensory experience. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So trigger warning for me, I really only put it around suicide and sexual abuse and then domestic violence. Like I might put like a little like TW,
Mm,
this, TW that. And in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking, oh, because there's something in here that will be triggering. I just know that that's kind of the cultural nomenclature for,
yeah.
hey, this is what this video is gonna be about. I sometimes will also do that where I'll just make sure in the first line of the video, like I'll say like, hey, for some of us who have experienced, suicidal thoughts, so in a sense, that is a trigger warning because in the first sentence, I kind of stated my intentions. I'm going to be
Mm,
talking about suicidal thoughts. And then people can give consent. Okay, I want to continue to hear more about that, or I can, scroll on. And so sometimes for me that looks like a trigger warning. Sometimes that just means I just say what I'm going to be talking about in the first sentence. I'm not actually worried about like triggering people in the neurological sense. I'm more worried
mm.
about people consent to, you know, dive into that topic if they feel like they're ready for it. Does that make sense?
Oh,
How do you see that? What do you think about that?
100%. I'm on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
I think because I never on any of my podcasts or my YouTube channel or anything, I never go into gory details of my trauma because I know that would be something that would be too much for someone if they've experienced something similar. However,
well, and because it brings them into the sensory experience of that, right? So that matches on.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have me. I'm going to ask you another question after that. But
Go ahead.
But in regards to trigger warnings, for me personally, I get frustrated when I see trigger warnings on every little thing. I think on social media, if someone's just talking about it generally or mentioning the word, that makes me frustrated because for me, if I didn't talk about these things, or if I didn't have guests that talked about certain mental health issues or stories or experiences that they've been through, then I don't think it would allow others to have that space to try to heal from them. I think I posted some quote like years and years ago when I started my platform where it said we need to be triggered to heal. But for me, that was the context was we need to be able to have that space to talk about it and have it be something that we can identify, like that chaos. We need to be able to, it needs to be tangible. It can't just be avoiding all these things all the time, or we're never going to get to a space where we can be more open about it generally. So
you can't heal something that you avoid.
I
mean, and the tact on how you approach it is important too. Right. So because you don't want to go in and just get flooded, and healing from trauma isn't diving in the deep end. It's piece by piece from a position of strength, so that's a key part of it. But I totally see what you're saying, that if we just avoid it or kind of treat it as an immoral thing to bring up serious topics, like that just doesn't help anybody. It just kind of defers the problem further down the road.
I liked how when you were talking about the experience of actually being like what a trigger actually is and is like, makes sense to me because I'm never triggered by TV shows or people talking about certain experiences. I'm triggered by a feeling and something that might be happening that was identical to what had happened in some way. And your mind doesn't even understand or know that that's happening, but your body does.
Precisely.
I find that interesting. Like, I've been reading this book called The Body Keeps Count.
Body Keeps the Score?
But yes, that's the one.
Good old Bessel van der Kolk. Yep.
Really good book. I didn't understand how much your body can still hang on to those traumas without you even realizing it. Like even the time of year could be something to you, so
100%. Yeah, I think that we're coming to a more sophisticated insight on that, just even as a culture. I think that that's something people are starting to catch on to. And but I think that it's too far to kind of disregard it entirely. Wanting to have people have the choice to give consent feels like a good line to me. But I agree where it's like putting a trigger warning in front of everything, and it just sometimes can present a boundary and just having real conversations that people need to have.
That's really well put. How is trauma and our attachment styles, how are they related? I've noticed with myself, and I feel like a few people can resonate, my attachment style isn't the same with every person. It depends. If I'm with an anxious partner, I'm avoidant. If I'm with an avoidant partner, I'm anxious. I have yet to have a secure partner. So to be determined.
To be determined.
No idea, but so I'm wondering.
Well, this is great. Well, I'll start with this. I mean, even just for listeners that might not be familiar with kind of the verbiage around attachment style. So attachment was a term that was really, I don't know, kind of popularized and I don't know, coined. Like we had the word attachment before this guy, but the way that we think about attachment was really influenced by a guy named John Bowlby. He was a psychologist, I think 1940s, 50s, somewhere in there. And then, he had a student named Mary Ainsworth who also did a lot of work on this. Lots of people have worked on attachment, but Mary Ainsworth did a very interesting experiment that really kind of canonized Bowlby's work in a lot of ways. And so here was the experiment that she pulled off: was she brought mothers in with their kind of like 3-year-old children and wanted to see how the children reacted in what she titled the strange situation. And so she built this room. I don't know, built the room. She went, maybe it was an office building. I don't know. She brought children and their mothers into this room, and there's toys spread out all over the floor. And so in a healthy attachment, a mother would walk in with their child And the child would sit on the mother's lap and look around and kind of look at all the different toys that were spread on the ground and think, oh, okay, this looks kind of fun. And kind of get down, kind of timid at first, but then would go and play with the toys. And would look back and be checking to make sure mom's still there. And okay, mom's there. That's fine. All right, I'm going to keep playing. And then they would introduce a stranger into the room that the child never seen before. The stranger would go and sit in the corner in a different chair. And for a healthy attached child, the child would then run back to mom, kind of, check out the stranger for a minute, look and see if he's a threat or if he's kind of chaotic or weird. Okay, he seems fine enough. He's just reading the paper. Okay, I'll go back to playing with toys. So the kid would go back to playing with toys. Then they would take mom from the room, leave the child in the room with the stranger, and then the child would burst into tears. And the child would get really nervous. Where's mom? Mommy, mommy. Child would come back. Child could be comforted, soothed, come back down. Oh, okay. And then go back to playing with toys. So that's a healthy attachment, right? And there's two other deviations from this healthy attachment, two different styles that they noticed in this experiment. The first, I'll let you guess what it is after I describe it to you. So the first one would be the child goes in and goes immediately to playing with the toys. And then the stranger enters the room. The child does not go to mom. The child stays playing with the toys, oblivious, or goes in the corner, stands by themselves. Mom leaves the room. Kid doesn't even react, doesn't even care. Mom enters back. Doesn't matter. Doesn't go to mom. Remains standing in the corner or playing with the toys. Would you say that's an anxious or an avoidant attachment?
I would say avoidant.
Yeah. It's as if the kid was there alone. It's essentially the kid saying, mom is not a basin of safety, is not a source for support, is not a source for checking in. I'm basically in this room on my own. I have to protect myself. I can't rely on anyone else. I'm in this on my own, right? Very little trust to no trust between child and mom. Now there's a second style, or I should say a third, a second dysfunctional style, where kid and mom would go in, kid would stay on mom's lap. Wouldn't go down to play with toys. Stranger enters in, kid stays on the lap. Mom leaves the room, kid goes ballistic, starts crying. Mom enters back into the room, kid cannot be calmed down, continues to cry, even goes to hitting mom on occasions, becomes violent. What do you make of that?
Anxious.
Yeah. And here's the anxiety, because it's a little strange, especially with the violence part. Like, why is he or she hitting? It's because it's like, sometimes I can depend on you and sometimes I can't. I'm not going to get off your lap because I don't know if you'll be there when I get back. When you left and you came back, I'm like, I knew you would leave. I knew I couldn't depend on you. I'm so angry that I can't depend on you. Why won't you just be stable for me? Why won't you just be solid? And the anger that comes out, the hitting, is like, I just wish that you would be the same. I just wish you would be consistent. Now, people have gone on to theorize that there's more than just those two forms of attachment. They title it different things. There's disorganized attachment. There's all sorts of different kind of nuances. But the spectrum, you could almost kind of think of it that way, is anxious and then anxious avoidance. There can be a combination of those two, and then avoidant. And then there's healthy attachment that stands outside of all that. So those are the attachment styles. Now, what's interesting, and you noted this is very intuitive of you, is that you don't just have an attachment style to a parent. Generally, I'm not just like an anxiously attached person overall. I can have an anxious attachment to mom. I can have an avoidant attachment to dad. I can have an anxious attachment to my partner. I can have an avoidant attachment to authority. So you can have different attachment styles, different people. And to make it even more confusing, you can actually have different forms of attachment to different parts of your mom or different parts of your dad. And this is leaning into something called internal family systems. This is kind of theory from Dr. Frank Anderson, where he says, for example, you can have a really warm relationship with the part of your dad that you play baseball with. You and dad, you go play baseball. It's fun. It's great. But then you realize he's not really very emotionally present. So in some regards, you have kind of this avoidant attachment to him because he's not really emotionally present. He's not really there for you if you're going through a crisis. It's not a very healthy attachment in that sense. But when you're playing baseball, you can depend on him. You can lean on him. He gives you good coaching. You feel warm when you're hanging out with him. And it's strange because it's like, how can I experience emotional warmth in this one, domain where we play baseball and feel totally emotionally distant and cold from him when it's anything else? And the answer to that isn't you either do or don't have a certain attachment style. It's you have both. You're healthily attached in one domain and you have an avoidant attachment in the other.
I like it's because it's gray. It's not black and white. That's what I like about it. I think a lot of the times pinpointing certain emotional behaviors are very black and white. There's very little room for gray in trying to understand it. But that almost makes it easier to understand and comprehend, because every single relationship that you have with every person in your life is going to be different. So therefore, your attachment to them is going to be different.
Yeah.
Does
And your
the
attachment to different people also is going to determine maybe even your attachment to others. Meaning, like, if you had an avoidant attachment towards God,
mm,
and then you could maybe do a little bit of internal processing and realize, well, maybe I have an avoidant attachment to my own, earthly father as well. So like my
yeah,
religious trauma, mirrors my relational trauma. Or, if you have, an attachment to authority, you just push away against authority. You're anxiously attached to authority. You're always mad at your boss for not being consistent, for not following through, for not being more
mm,
consistent. Like, you might find that your relationship with mom impacts not just you and mom, but also impacts how you interface with authority. And so it's kind of connected in a web. It's not just that you have isolated attachment. It's that
mm,
the way you attach to some people can also affect the way that you attach to others. And and all of that isn't to make it all the more confusing. It's actually to help make it clear,
yeah.
because it's really, I don't know, it's really discouraging and overwhelming when you're like, why do I keep getting fired from job after job? I just keep losing my temper at my boss. And it's like, might have something to do with mom.
Mm,
And then you're like, oh, yeah, my mom was hypercritical. She was always overbearing. I felt like I couldn't assert my identity or my independence unless I was yelling and violent towards her, because when I lashed out at her, then she would finally back off and let me just be my own individual person. And so I found that the way that I interface with authority in a lot of ways is through lashing out. That's how I assert my ideas. And I haven't matured that. I haven't healed that. I haven't developed that. And so in every job, I lash out at my boss and then I get fired. And I don't know, like, those patterns can spread into other relationships, I guess is my point.
do you think that our attachment styles, do they stem from genetics or trauma? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, trauma.
Trauma, yeah.
Yeah, it's a theory around trauma. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we have data to support the idea that attachment is a genetic. I mean, you can say someone's introverted or extroverted, but that's not really the same thing as
Yeah.
saying someone's anxiously attached or avoidant or this or
Mm.
that.
In the very beginning, you mentioned something that I liked, is you see a lot of these tumultuous relationships where two people came together and their relationship was just bananas. But when they
Mhm.
started healing that underlying trauma, are they healing that underlying trauma together or individually and then coming together? What does it
Mm,
normally look like? How have you
yeah,
seen that dynamic?
good question. I think I would say that, when we focus more on like trauma healing within a couple's relationship, I always find that having the partner be able to witness some of the process, and I emphasize some, because the most ideal situation is that both people are in individual counseling, kind of working on their own story and their own traumas, and then there's a marriage counseling component.
Mm,
And so when it comes to like intimacy, for example, understanding your partner's attachment style is super helpful, because it actually gives you some empathy. It's like, oh my gosh, he always just like avoids conflict. He's always just like shutting me down. Every time I try to talk to him about what I'm feeling, he just like walks out of the room.
mm,
And then we start to ask, well, like, well, how are you talking about how you're feeling? Are you yelling when you're talking about how you feel? Well, yeah, like, I'm angry he's not listening. And it's like, oh, okay. But if I can understand that he has an avoidant attachment style, if I can understand that the yelling, the intensity actually overwhelms him, shuts him down, and he's not running from you, he's just running to safety.
mm,
That's helpful to understand, because then if you can be that basin of safety, if you can be actually a calm, gentle, safe place while talking about how you feel. I'm not asking you to sugarcoat how you're feeling. I'm not asking you to like, repress it or not talk about what you're actually experiencing. I'm just saying, if there was tact, if there was a shift in strategy to be able to lead with gentleness in that conversation, even though of course you have anger, but even to express anger through gentleness, which seems like a paradox, but it's not, then that would actually create the outcome that you actually desperately need, which is to feel heard,
mm,
to feel seen, and for them to understand you on a deep level. And then for you to understand, well, my attachment style is actually rather anxious. So for me, when I feel like someone's not being consistent, I lash out. Oh, okay, that's why. Okay, there's a unique mix here. I'm lashing out, he's shutting down. And it's not that he's just disregarding what I'm saying. And it's not that, because he'll, in this gender stereotypes little situation we built here, if he, we're describing this, he might say, well, she's just crazy. She just loses it on me. She's just high maintenance.
mm,
It's like, well, actually, if we were to step a little bit deeper and understand her experiences, her traumatic experiences. Like, what do you see? Okay, she had parents that were pretty inconsistent. She really had to parent herself. She couldn't feel like she could just lean in and trust her father, her mother to take care of her needs. She needed to look out for her own needs because, I don't know, she was feeling used by her parents. She was feeling manipulated by her parents. So she realized she was on her own, but she really desperately wanted to connect to mom because sometimes mom would be there. But there was food on the table. There was this, there was that. So it was kind of confusing. In some instances, mom was there. In some instances, mom was manipulative. And so she kind of leaned into an anxious attachment style where retaliation is probably just what instinctually flows up through her body. So she's just vindictive. Well, maybe. Or when she feels unsafe, she lashes out. What can we do in this situation to feel safe? And that's maybe a big aha moment that a lot of people, especially early on in counseling, realize is that the goal isn't just intimacy. The goal isn't just more sex. The goal isn't just to not fight as much. The goal is safety.
Earlier dating stages, for me, that's what I look for, is safety. I go, do I feel safe with this person? And can I feel safe? Because you may not right away. Everyone has their own things that they've been through. Everyone's a different person. But safety is what it is. If you don't feel safe with someone, and like anyone in your life, even my siblings, and the same thing. If I don't feel safe with them in some way, emotionally or mentally, I just don't say anything. I don't feel safe, so what's the point? But the way you described that was just so key and spot on, and it makes perfect sense, because even I'm thinking about some past relationships. I'm going, oh no, that makes sense. Yeah, why this would happen, why certain people would react in certain ways due to not feeling safe emotionally, so.
Yeah. And I think the biggest pushback I get on that is, well, it's not very, like, I don't know, sexually interesting just to have this totally safe person, right? Or like you want some intrigue. And my response to that is like, no, you want adventure. You want authenticity. You don't want a two-dimensional kind of like floppy person that, has no backbone. You want someone with a tremendous amount of power, but that's geared towards making sure that you're taken care of. You want something that's ferociously controlled. Like those aren't opposed. Like it can be both. It's this paradox of someone who has tremendous ability for independence and is in submitting that independence into a commitment. It's not dousing the independence. It's actually insinuating it. It's giving it a space for it to grow and flourish. And a lot of us get into these kind of binary things. Like I'm either independent and I have my identity, or I get into a relationship and I lose all my independence and I'm completely like submitted to whatever they want. And I'm like, oh, that's the wrong binary. Or I want someone kind of dangerous, someone who like really makes me sexually excited, someone I find really attractive, and someone who kind of treats me like crap because for whatever reason I'm totally into that. Or I find some totally like nice guy, like, pathetic, kind of thing that is safe, but da 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 da. And I'm like, no, we're thinking in character types there. We're talking about images. We're talking about personas. What I'm talking about here is bringing the full substance of your identity and who you are and your experience, and your partner bringing the full substance of who they are. All the shadow, all the good, all the bad, all the quirks and struggles and places you still need to grow, and the places that, I don't know, aren't shiny and attractive and beautiful on the outside, bringing all of that and bringing it into a partnership where it's like, I want to walk with you through this journey of healing, through this journey of life. Even like, there is no greater adventure, and there is nowhere close that you're on the razor edge of danger and completely held in safety than when you're intimate with someone, really intimate, not just relating to them in this two-dimensional image, but in the 3D picture of who they are. And I'm like, yeah, it's the adventure of your life. I think the danger is just as two-dimensional as the niceness, and people sometimes misunderstand the two and put them in a binary. I'm like,
I see that all over social media. It's like you have to pick one or the other, and if you don't pick one, that means you have X, Y, and Z attachment and mental health issues. And I disagree with that. I think a lot of people quit too early in certain dynamics because some of the uglier backbone and stories come out, and space isn't held for each other. Space might be held for one and not the other, and that can get kind of funky. But
I agree.
everyone has that deeper, darker shadow side. And if you can hold space for them, they'll hold space for you too. And that's how it's supposed, that's how
Yeah,
it's supposed to
hopefully,
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when two people are committed to that, you're right. It's something magical. Like,
Mhm.
and then abuse happens when it's not reciprocal. Well, I guess you mentioned that you're doing this podcast because you were diagnosed with PTSD and
Mhm.
wanted to share your experience with other people. What do you feel like even in doing this podcast? Like, what are some of the insights that you found to be the most presently helpful with the different guests that you have? This whole experience of doing this on social media, it's a self-exploration in a lot of ways.
It
What's this been like
is.
for you?
Oh, it's been for me personally, because I'm such a creative human,
Mhm.
this was always an outlet for me to have a space where I felt safe to share,
Mhm.
and to help others. And what I've noticed the most on my podcast is there's so many people that have been through so many different experiences, and the most unlikely human beings that you would ever come across. You hear their story and what they've been through, and it starts to allow you to see them for them and who they really truly are authentically. And
Mhm.
that's something I love. I always pick the guests for my podcast, or I really
Mhm.
suss them out,
Yeah.
because I want to make sure that they have an air of genuinity and authenticity to them.
Yeah.
And most of them, I don't know their stories. I just have them on here, and I'm always surprised too when I hear what they've been through, some of the adversity. I think
Mhm.
everyone's experienced adversity in their own way, and we forget that. We forget that everyone has their stories, and we don't see them for them. We see them as this facade that they put themselves on, because through social media, you can't really get you can't really read someone completely sometimes. You don't
Mhm.
really understand them or know them. So when I hear their stories, it always the reactions I get from my audience are, wow, I didn't know that so and so had that story. I'm like, yeah, turn around to like the person next to you in a coffee shop, and I
Mhm.
wonder if they have a story too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever thought of becoming a counselor yourself?
You're the millionth person.
Well, you have a really warm, inviting energy. I think that
Thank
it
you.
it would fit you. Yeah. What are your
I
thoughts?
uh I said, my you know what, my 82-year-old grandmother said the same thing to me, like, oh gosh, I want to say a couple weeks ago, because she asked me about my platform, because I love talking to people. I love
Mhm.
understanding them. Um and she goes, why don't you go into, like, do like a proper field, like study and do the thing. Um, and I'm like, Grandma, I don't have the time. I don't know if I have the bandwidth to do it, but I
Yeah.
found an alternate way to try to help people just through coaching, and I went, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
if I can do something and make a difference in some way in someone's life, with also working with their therapist, which is kind of cool. That's what I
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
specialize in. I don't think that coaching should be in lieu of therapy. I think
Mhm.
that's horrible. I think that's a really
Yeah.
bad idea. And
Yeah.
that I'm just there to kind of hold them accountable and help them process what they need to process. But also, I think the difference, I guess, with coaching is they have more access to me if they need help mentally or
Mhm.
emotionally than their therapist does.
I think coaching is moving into a different realm than it's always been before. I think
Mhm.
before it was very kind of mixed into almost kind of inspiration and like motivational speaking. And what I've seen
Yeah.
is like this huge influx of trauma informed coaching
Yeah.
that is bringing a totally different angle to the world of trauma work and something needed. And you named it, like the access to a coach is completely
Mhm.
different than the 1 hour a week that you get with a therapist.
Yeah.
And then the kind of permission you have to really hold people accountable, to move people towards their goals is going to be
Mhm.
something that's very different than the activity of therapy. That's a lot
Yeah.
more like exploratory and moving into the past that isn't as geared on the future.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, yeah, I,
Yeah.
I I think that's a really fitting role for you. I can
Oh,
see it.
thank you. I think in sharing my story, my journey, and just being very real, um, and just saying, "Hey, I don't have it figured out. No one does. I'm a human. I'm not
Mhm.
above you or below you. Like, we're two people just trying to help each other heal."
Mhm.
That seemed to really resonate with people from what I've heard. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a beautiful posture to take.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
so human and honest. I love that. Thank you for
Thank
sharing that
you.
with me. That's so great.
So the last question I always ask is, if anyone has resonated with anything that you've talked about today, what would be the advice that you give them?
Hmm. One, kind of the animating idea that guides a lot of my work is moving towards what's meaningful despite hardship. That's like my tagline. I put it in my podcast. I put it in, I don't know, on my Instagram bio and everything, just because it really does, I feel, encompass the main thing, which is we don't escape hardship, get away from it with better strategies, repress it with more intensity. We actually move towards what's meaningful within it.
Mm.
And the reason something is hard is because it matters. Like the reason that the panic attacks are bothering you, the reason that the marriage, falling apart is bothering you, the reason that, I don't know, the boundaries with mom are hard and frustrating and stressful is because mom matters, her opinion matters, even as much as we wish it didn't matter, or the marriage matters, the panic attacks, like your feeling of well-being, your feeling of safety within your own body, your feeling of being able to go to work or, go to the store and not feel like constantly in danger, that matters. And so we can't avoid the pain without also avoiding the thing that matters to us.
Mm.
And that's not a life full of a lot of well-being, is completely divorced and separated from the thing that matters. So I'd say the path is in, not away. And in there's something really valuable. And there's a lot of energy in there too. Because I think one of the big pushbacks I hear from especially trauma clients is like, how am I supposed to get all the energy and all the motivation to like press into all this like deep work going through my past? It sounds exhausting. I'm barely holding it together as I am. And I'm like, there is a treasure trove of animating energy, within those stories that will press you through. And yeah, I don't know, if you want to take a next step in that, I would say is to reach out to someone that you trust in your world. Maybe that's a therapist or a coach. Maybe that's a friend, a mentor, someone in your community, and to start to share some of these experiences and start to come up with a plan for being able to move in and move through. That would be my advice.
I love that. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. So
Yeah, of
appreciate you.
course. Thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation. I know so many people are going to benefit from it. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, you have to go through the eye of the storm to see the clear horizon ahead. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next week.